That's the great Quincy Jones, Back on the Block. It's the album. The title of that track, Birdland. Doing a little jazz hip-hop fusion here on the Doc Hardy Show. But we're going to put music aside for a moment because as advertised online all week, my guest in the Doc Hardy Zoom room is screenwriter and U.S. Today best-selling suspense novelist, Cate Holahan. Cate, how are you today?
Oh, I'm well. Thank you so much for having me on, Doc.
Thank you for being on the program. We have a friend in common who that's how it came about. My dear friend Cate Holahan, who I've known since she hates when I say this, since she was 9 years old, and she was just as smart and precocious then as she is now. But she said, yeah, my friend Cate does this and that, the other thing, and then I read about you. And I'm like, wow, this would be I like to have authors and screenwriters. I had a screenwriter on the show 2 weeks ago. So I want to talk to you about your work. Your last novel was Darkness of Others. Is that correct?
Yes.
That was your 6th solo standalone book, your 7th published work. Of course, now your work is being optioned for film and television. And you have streaming right now something called Deadly Estate. Is that right?
Yes, that was the one that Zakia helped me on, actually.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I had this idea. Well, I was talking to Fox Mar Vista, to some executives there, and they said they wanted something about the Great Resignation, people getting tired of jobs putting them through things that they shouldn't and wanting to quit, but they wanted a murder mystery around it. And so I thought, well, at the time it was during the pandemic had just happened and all of these hotels had closed. And I remember talking to Zakia and her explaining to me what kind of a burden that was, right? When you're in that industry and all of a sudden the hotels all just shut down and these places that you've given all this loyalty to are like, good luck, see you when we open. And so she switched careers.
Yes.
And it's now a teacher. And so I said, can you talk to me and tell me, like, what was it like running a division of a hotel? And what are some of the stressors there? And what are the crazy, ridiculous things that people think just because they're on vacation that you have to put up with, And so she gave me a lowdown a bit. And then I also have a cousin who works in the hotel industry, and he gave me some anecdotes as well. And so I kind of worked that into this murder mystery story about Zakia. I kept her name. I took
so the character's name is Zakia? Yes. Oh, that's so that was going to be one of my questions. Okay, cool. Awesome.
I thought it was a fun nod.
Yeah.
So I kept her name, and Zakia is working at this hotel, and it's being bought by this billionaire who kind of wants, to turn everything like the decor all gold and is very interested in the aesthetics of the place, but not so much how it's being run. And there's a murder in the hotel. And then the guy's son shows up dead. And anyway, it's a twisty mystery, and she's blamed and she has to figure it out. But she also gets her wonderful quit scene, where she's like, I'm not. And then,
That's amazing.
All the Reddit threads, right? Of like what I said to my boss when I finally did it. Yeah. That was basically that scene.
Oh, that's great. And so that's Deadly Estate. It's currently streaming on Tubi, right? Is that where it is?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. And congratulations to you on that. So you were, a novelist, and it seems like you transitioned into the screenwriting film industry. Talk about that process, that transition. What has that been like for you?
Sure. Well, I'm still kind of doing both because I also have another book coming out, Young Rich Widows, which is an audio. Well, the one that came out in audio last year is coming out in print. And then the second of the series is coming out in audio. I write that with 3 other women. So I'm trying to do both. What I've learned as a writer is that we kind of have to have our fingers in a lot of pies because the industry keeps changing. During COVID, our version of the hotels being closed where the bookstores were all closed.
Right.
And so if you were a writer, and my books were published by Grand Central Publishing, which is a division of Hachette, I rely on like your book being in the new and notable section in the bookstore And,
Oh.
that kind of like is what drives the traffic. And then people pick up your book and they read the back and they go, oh, that sounds interesting. And that's part of what helps me sell books. So if bookstores are closed, or as is the case now, where they closed and then they never reopened,
Yeah.
You kind of are trying to diversify that income stream. And so for me, it's trying to kind of add on to another way that I can tell stories. And so I've really just been trying to tell stories in a way that however someone wants to consume a story, it's not very efficient for me if it's over around a campfire because of the cost of flying out to that campfire and back.
Right.
But short of that, I want to be there to try and tell them.
That's amazing. When you're putting a story together, whether it's for a book or for something that's going to be consumed another way, how do you strike a balance between being original and delivering something that people want to consume, people that want to watch or want to read? How do you balance that?
I don't know. It's difficult because certainly trends are bought. And so, sometimes it's a matter of you pitch a bunch of story ideas to your publisher and they like this one, or they come up and they say, well, actually we want something, and they give you some general area, right? But as long as your characters come from you and are original people, even if you put them in a situation that is ripped from the headlines, I think that you end up with a very different story. So for example, my second book, The Widower's Wife, at the time, the financial crisis had happened and a lot of people were thinking of, how they were going to permanently downsize their lives. They had kind of fueled it on debt and had these big houses. And so I wrote a murder mystery in which a family has to do that and then decides at one point, like, well, do we really, or can we just take out life insurance policies on each other, right? And fake our death. And so obviously, like, the life insurance faking death story has been done.
Yeah.
And the financial hardship has been done. But, and then I had the character was a mixed Brazilian immigrant who also had the fact that she didn't really have a family system in the United States, but she did have connections outside the United States that allowed her to make some moves that she otherwise wouldn't have been able to make. And so the story really came out of the characters, but, I don't think that the general atmosphere, right, was just what was going on in the world, plus like stories, the kind of stories that we tell, right? There's only so many ways to die. There's only so many ways to kill someone. And especially for me, I write domestic suspense and thrillers, so people are going to die. There's right.
It's predictable but enjoyable. That's what I consume. I travel a lot for business, and so I'm always looking for something to read on the plane there and back. So I have a couple of your books I'll be reading to really get to know your writing style better. So it sounds like you take these situations, and there's a lot of research involved. How much research do you have to do, like in volume of hours or day, to be prepared to write a specific book?
Yeah, it depends on the book, but I'm a big researcher because I was a journalist before I became an author.
Right.
I was a journalist for over a decade. So I love the research part of it. What I didn't like about being a journalist was the confrontational part where it's like, I'm going to hold your feet to the fire, or I'm going to show up the day after your kid had some awful thing happen. Like that part I didn't.
The stuff we want to know about. That's what we want to watch on the news, that stuff.
Right, yeah. So the stuff that made me feel like, oh gosh, am I being exploited? Am I exploiting someone? That I didn't love. And then in business journalism, I just didn't love the fact that the powerful people are so insulated by PR people that it's very difficult to get real information because there's you, and then there's like their army that's paid millions of dollars to make sure that their company looks good, right? And so it's difficult. And of course you have public disclosures, but it's a difficult thing. So the nice thing about research for books is it's amazing. Like I wrote one One Little Secret, which I'm working on turning into a television show. But in that one, I wanted a female detective. And I just looked up the place that had the most female detectives in New Jersey, in these small towns. And I found one department that had two. And I called them up and said, hey, can I hang out with your female detectives? I really want to know how they approach their job and how it's different than male detectives. And I interviewed male detectives before. And I was shocked. And I just said, I want to get it right in the book. Right. I don't want to have a limp character. And people are so generous because they want to see their experiences reflected back in a way that feels real to them. Even if it's in a kind of a crazy murder mystery story, right? So, and there was this wonderful woman, Shauna Maldonado, and she let me hang out with her for the day. And she told me that female detectives actually have some of the hardest work because they get all the domestic and sexual abuse cases. Because when somebody has gone through an experience where they've been victimized, often by someone of the other gender, people want to deal with a person of their gender, right? They're intimidated if you've just had a fist fight with your husband, and then a big burly police officer who's a man comes in. It's like re-traumatizing sometimes. So they send the female detectives on all these cases because it's just how society associates them also as more motherly, safer. Right. And that bleeds into it. Whether that's true or not, the male detective could be the biggest teddy bear in the world, but it's just, how perception's reality. Right. Yeah. So the emotional toll of that being a female detective, right, where you're just constantly, you're not getting, where it's the chases, you're getting like all this heavy emotional lifting work. Right. And so that was so interesting to me to be able to hang out and hear those stories. And she had she had one crazy one, which I didn't want to touch in a book, but a child had, there was a family that was taking in foster kids. And one of the foster kids said that the family was being abusive, was being sexually abusive. And so, of course, they investigate it, and they have just the way it is. As soon as that's allegations made, you have to take all the kids out of the house, including the biological kids. And it turned out, after kind of like tearing apart this family's life, that it was all made up, that the foster child thought that if they could make the foster parents look bad, they'd be sent back to their biological parents. So it's sad all around,
wow,
right?
But
But investigating that, right? And who do you believe? And you're trying to keep everyone safe. And in the meantime, just the nature of the allegation kind of blows up everything in the family. So, so it's just, I found people just being so generous with their time and telling me stories. And then I try to write cool ones,
That's amazing. At what age were you when you knew you had this passion for writing and that you were going to do this?
Yeah. Well, I always wanted to write fiction. I wrote my first fiction. I know this is going to sound crazy, but it's true. So I wrote my first fiction story at 7. And then because my mom is Jamaican, she immediately sent it off to Scholastic to be published, because that's a very Jamaican thing to do.
All my Jamaican friends who are listening will get that one.
That's right. My mother was like, all right, so you wrote something and here we go, and so I was rejected, unsurprisingly.
Right.
But in the rejection came a nice note that kind of said, keep at it. And I did, although I wasn't really successful at it until I took the leap and quit my journalism job after I had a second kid. Mm-hmm. And that was, that would have been like in 2011. And I was just like, I'm going to write full time. And the reason why I think is, and I went to a conference that was depressing, but the author was honest. And what the author said was, you have to understand that all of your part-time books that you were spending like, a couple of hours here and a couple of hours there are going up against me. And I write 8 hours a day, right? And I'm selling to those same publishers that you're trying to get to look at your book. So, you're not necessarily going to, even if you're the most talented person in the world, you might not be better than my 8 hours compared to your, one that you kind of get between 9 and 10 before you go to bed isn't going to cut it.
Right. Wow. That's real talk.
Yeah, it was real talk. And so, and depressing, right? Because I was writing for a magazine all day, and then I would go back and write my fiction. And so I was like, all right, I think it's one of those things where you just have to go, I'm going to do it. So I had maternity leave. Well, actually, I was on contract. So I was like, before I applied for another contract, at the time I was working at CNBC, I was like, I'm going to just take some time and do this for like 6 months, write a book and see if I can get an agent. And I did. And then I sold the first one, and that was it. But I think that had I still been working and writing all day and then trying to write again at night, I don't know if it would have happened.
Wow. I'm Doc Hardy. This is the Doc Hardy Show on WPKN, and I'm talking to author Cate Holahan. Cate, let's talk about education for a minute. Go back to our friend Zakiya, because she's a teacher now.
Yes.
And one of the things I want to ask you about is, language arts programs in school. How important were they for you to develop as a young writer?
So important. I mean, I thanked my high school English teachers in my books, because that was really where I learned to write. It was high school English and it's interesting because even writing fiction, that whole thing of those, like, that they teach you starting in elementary school with the hamburger paragraphs, where it's like topic, sentence, and then your supporting, and then your conclusion. You do that even in fiction. You do it where, like, the person walks into the room, and that's your topic sentence. They just walked into the room. And then all those supporting are like, what have they seen when they walk into the room? And then you kind of tie that out with, like, they move over and they start talking to someone. That's your conclusion of, they walked into the room, they saw what was in the room, and now they're talking to somebody. And now you have the first line of dialogue. And so that's so important, that structure. I'm a big believer, partially because I also write genre fiction, so structure is really important. But I'm a big believer that if you have the structure down and you know all the rules, you have to have it, and then break them. But then you know why you're breaking them, And I think that foundation was really in middle and high school. And it makes me nervous because I think now I understand that STEM is where the jobs are.
Right.
So that's what schools are focusing on. But even I've seen with my own children, just kind of the way they treat writing. And it's almost like, well, as long as all the facts are there,
right.
And I'm like, that's not it, and so I'm that annoying parent that was sitting there, hi, so I teach writing to adults, like on the side in little programs, and these are some of the notes I use, and if it's helpful, but because I do think it's important, and darn it, a Chat GPT might take my job. And
that was my next question. My next question was about Chat GPT. No, great.
Yes.
Keep going. I was going to ask you about that AI.
Shut it down, please. I'm so anti Chat GPT because because I think the bigger headline is, I think that Chat GPT is supposed to have the processing power, not just ChatGPT, AI is supposed to have the processing power of a human brain in whatever it is, like 2035 or something, right? And after that, it's going to continue to keep developing, right? And like the processing power sometimes doubles in a year, right? That's Moore's law.
Yeah.
So my problem with it is I do not think society is ready for all of the higher order functions and jobs to be taken by computers, because people are socialized that so much of our identity comes from what we do. Right. And if all of a sudden what we do isn't important, I think you're going to end up with a very unstable society. And that tends to lead to violence because people don't want to be made obsolete. Yeah. Right. And ChatGPT is coming from my job. So I also feel like it's partially, it's a selfish thing, but I also think it's coming for everybody's job. So yes, there's that.
All right. I have to go. But, I want to thank you for being on the program. Again, Cate Holahan on the line in the Zoom room, Her movie's called Deadly Estate. It's streaming on Tubi TV right now. Cate, how can people follow you on social media and stay abreast of what you're writing, what you're doing?
Oh, thanks so much for asking. Yes. So as the movie, you just type in Deadly Estate. Sometimes Samantha Wilkes is the lead actress. She's amazing. And it will come up on that app. And my social, I'm also Cate Holahan and Cate Holahan Books. And if you Google that, it all comes up. And I'm cateholahan.com. And it's spelled like Ola and then Han, because that's the best way to break up an Irish last name when you're Jamaican. Just go with Spanish.
All right, everybody. That's Cate Holahan. Cate, thank you so much. Appreciate you being on the program. Maybe we can talk again next time when your next book comes out.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. I got about 3 minutes left. Let's wrap things up. It's kind of mad in Bridgeport right now. It's real hot. It's been hot. A little craziness this week. Everybody needs to just chill out. So I'm going to give you some chill out music. A little Kool and the Gang. I'm Doc Hardy.